Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday. Now, for those of you new to the channel, these videos are dedicated to answering your health-related questions. So if you have any questions concerning your health, somebody else's health, nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbalism, or really anything related to health and wellness, and you would like our help in answering that question, all you have to do is leave those questions in the comment section below, and we'll be answering those questions based on popularity, the questions that we feel will be most beneficial to the community as a whole, and of course the questions that we are capable of answering. Something else wonderful about these videos is that every week from the comment section, we select one person at random to win a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms of their choice. So even if you don't have a health related question for us this week, but you're interested in winning some free tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms, all you have to do to be entered to win is make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, and just drop any old comment in the comment section below. And with all that being said, let's get to this week's questions. Okay, so getting to our first question, this question reads, what's the VitaJing take on something as simple as water? What counts as pure? What should the pH be? What about structured water? And so on. Regardless, thanks for your consideration. Alright, so I actually have a very simple take on water. For physiological reasons, I actually don't recommend consuming that much plain water. What I mean by that is not consuming 8 glasses upwards to a gallon of just plain mineralless water, or as you put it, maybe unstructured water. And this is for a couple of very simple reasons. First of all, the amount of water necessary for each person is incredibly variable, meaning that it's really subjective. It changes person to person. In the most basic sense, a person who is very inactive, who has a low metabolic rate, which is very common. Plenty of people have a generally low metabolic rate due to low levels of activity, not getting enough sun exposure, not being active or outside very often because of their diet. A lot of people are eating low calorie diets. A lot of people, because of ketosis, are putting themselves in a lower metabolic state, not consuming sugar. Many factors, including environmental estrogens and toxins, are making people somewhat hypothyroid to some degree. And this is going to make their cells less efficient at, let's say, metabolizing water. So fluid metabolism downregulates, and this is going to make it very, very easy to become overhydrated or to waterlog your cells or give yourself edema, which is water retention. So because the general population, I would say about 80% of people probably have some form of hypothyroidism, consuming too much water is a very easy thing to do. In fact, I would say more people are consuming too much water today than not enough. And this is again because of the fact that when your metabolism is slow, your cells are going to hold on to water more. They're going to become more overhydrated or waterlogged. So unless, of course, you're an athlete, you're very active, you're living outdoors practically, you're more or less closer to the end of being a wild animal, you're probably not going to need that much water. But even so, if you observe animals, I'm always observing animals because I'm living on the mountain and I observe my dogs, kind of wild hybrid domesticated animals. And it's interesting because they don't drink that much water at all. However, they eat an entirely raw foods diet, and all foods contain a high concentration of water. Most food, whether it's a fruit or even a piece of meat, contains about 70% water. And if you don't believe me, just go take a piece of steak, put it outside, leave it there, and watch what happens to it over time. As it becomes dehydrated, it'll reduce down to about 30% of its volume. So all foods, as long as you're consuming a whole foods diet, you're probably getting plenty of water, especially if you're consuming enough fruit and good ripe fruit, then you're probably going to be hydrated enough. And getting back to my point with observing my dogs and animals, the only time I ever see my dogs really thirsty for water is after they've just ran down some deer for 15 minutes straight. So again, that's obviously increasing the metabolic rate. They have a greater demand for water at that point, so they're thirstier. So through my observation, few people are as connected to their body as animals are connected to theirs. Humans tend to be more so living life through their mind, if anything else, not through their body, not through just pure awareness. So oftentimes when it comes to water, being an example, people tend to drink because they think they should be drinking, oh, I need to drink some water because that's what's healthy. It's an ideology. So their drinking patterns, like many other things, are sort of automatic. They're doing it automatically from their mind, not because their body is actually giving them a signal for thirst to actually drink. So putting all of these things to practice, my basic viewpoint on hydration and water into a couple of tips. Number one, with anything else related to health, follow your body's natural cravings. You'll know your body needs water because it will tell you. Despite what people might tell you, I've seen research saying that as you age, the communication network between your mind and your body's ability to know when it's thirsty becomes diminished. However, I would say that that's a major insult on your body. I would say that the body's probably a lot more intelligent when it comes to food, water, sleep, and its needs than you are. If anything, your body's probably speaking loud and clear. We're just not listening. So listening to your body is the number one thing to do. Your body has thousands of built-in mechanisms for achieving homeostasis. Your cravings for food, being hungry, having an appetite or not, and being thirsty are just a couple of prime examples of that. So if you're somebody who senses that they're dehydrated, but you're not finding that you're thirsty, it's possible that your metabolism is just very, very slow. If your metabolic rate is really slow, just like with food, you might need more calories. You might need more hydration, but your body's not going to send you those signals for water or food because your metabolic rate is so slow. If you give it any extra food or water, especially too much in a short period of time, it's not going to be able to metabolize it. So a lot of the times people who might sense dehydration, but they're not thirsty, they're not getting that signal, it's just because their metabolic rate is really suppressed. And this happens with food too. You have a lot of people who don't have an appetite, but their metabolism is just really, really slow. Although they could use food, their body's not asking for it because they've suppressed their metabolism to the point where it won't be able to handle any excess food. So the way around that and getting to tip number 2 is to, other than follow your body's natural urges and cravings and senses, would be to just try to get the bulk of your water through good quality diet. I've personally found that over the years, I only eat whole foods. I don't eat processed, dried, crackered, boxed, weird industrial foods. And what I found is that doing that for the last 15 years, that I don't really have strong cravings for water at all. There'll be a couple of times where I've worked out more intensely, or I just didn't get enough water through my food in that particular day for whatever reason, and all of a sudden I'll notice, oh, I'm kind of thirsty for some water. But more often than not, I don't necessarily ever crave water. I'm never really thirsty, and I really don't drink that much water because my diet is so rich in water. I'm getting so much water through all of the milk that I drink. I drink a lot of good quality milk. I drink a lot of good quality fresh squeezed fruit juices. I'm eating a lot of ripe fruit when it's in season. So I'm getting tons of water through my diet. And I found that, especially because I have a good metabolism, that I'm not necessarily thirsty for water all the time. So tip number 2, to summarize, is just to try to get most of your water through a high quality whole foods diet that is rich in water. And also, if you want to supplement more liquid into your diet, then leading to tip number 3 is, if you're going to drink water, I personally would recommend getting distilled water and adding a pinch of salt to it, good quality salt. And other than that, I would personally recommend consuming more homemade soups, bone broths. In fact, going back in time, Native Americans and Aboriginal people, they probably consumed more soups than they ever did water. And this is probably not just because of taste purposes, but back then they didn't have filtration systems. So they purified their water usually by boiling it and making a bone broth or a stock of some sorts. So to summarize, follow your natural cravings. If you're thirsty, drink. If you're not, don't drink. You either don't need it or your metabolism is really slow. So you're going to want to focus on boosting your metabolism through good nutrition and lifestyle. Number 2, eat a whole foods diet that is rich in water, and you'll probably get all the water your body needs for its functions. Last but not least, if you are thirsty, and you want to add liquids to your diet, focus on whole food forms of liquids. Don't just go for plain bottled water, especially in plastic bottles, but go for distilled water. If you can get it from a spring, add some sea salt to it to add the minerals so that way you can metabolize that fluid more efficiently. And then also probably focus on getting fresh fruits, fresh juices, and make bone broth so that way you're getting a liquid that is more easily metabolized and something that you don't necessarily need to drink a ton of to feel hydrated. That's a good way to know whether or not what you're drinking is actually hydrating you. If you need to chug an entire bottle of water, it's not doing the job. I personally find that a small glass, 8 ounces of juice or bone broth is more hydrating than a whole liter of water. So those are just a few very simple tips and my takes on water. Hopefully that helps. All right, getting to question number 2. This is a very simple one, but I just figured I'd answer it. Is Eleuthera extract the same as Siberian ginseng? So the answer to that question is yes. Eleuthero actually is just another name for Siberian ginseng. Siberian ginseng is not to be confused with Korean ginseng, red ginseng, or Chinese ginseng, or American ginseng. There are a couple of different classes of ginsengs that are out there. From my understanding, Siberian ginseng is Eleuthero, that is the same product, and that has a slightly different property than, let's say, American ginseng, which you can find here in the wild, and it's a very valuable, sort of scarce plant that is very highly sought after. And then there's Korean and red ginseng, which are the most commonly studied, I believe. So yes, if you're wondering, Siberian ginseng is Eleuthero, and this does have some different properties than the Korean or red ginsengs. But nevertheless, what they have in common is that they're generally all adaptogenic. They all tend to increase your resilience to stress. They all have immunomodulating sort of properties, but you just might find various different studies having different constituents. And so because they are different plants, they will have somewhat different effects. If you're really curious, we have blogs and videos here on the channel that talk about the benefits of specifically Siberian ginseng. And then if you hop online, you can find all sorts of studies about the other types of ginsengs. From my research, American ginseng is the least well studied, but I'm pretty sure because it's from the same plant species that it's going to have similar properties if it were studied. All right, getting to our third question. I just want to answer this one really fast as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't aspirin damage the lining of the stomach and potentially cause bleeding? So that's something that you'll probably see if you're researching aspirin, but what I've come to find is that it's not aspirin directly. There are some studies that will say aspirin has this direct effect, but the major effect that aspirin's having in any negative way is that because it acts very similar to vitamin K2, it tends to deplete K2. And it's actually not the aspirin necessarily directly having some sort of destructive effect on the tissue. It's through its depletion of vitamin K2, and keep in mind that vitamin K2 is one of the most important elements for proper blood formation, the formation of red blood cells, and proper clotting. So without proper levels of K2, you tend to run into bleeding issues because the amount of clots and red blood cells being formed to the ratio that are being destroyed are imbalanced. So what I've personally found, again, through research, through looking at the different mechanisms, and through personal experience, that as long as you're supplementing 2 milligrams of vitamin K2 per 300 milligrams of aspirin, that you're going to balance the equation, you shouldn't have any bleeding issues. So from what I've seen, and I would only ever recommend something if I've studied it pretty intensely, if it has a lot of credibility behind it, and if I understood the mechanisms. And aspirin really has so many more benefits than anything that could be potentially damaging. It's an antithrombotic, like I said, an anti-inflammatory, anti-endotoxin, anti-serotonin, anti-estrogen, anti-inflammatory. There's again hundreds of studies behind aspirin's effects. There's really cool studies where they take aspirin and alcohol and inject it into mice. And at the same time that both of these substances are being induced or injected into the liver, that not only does the aspirin mitigate or nullify the damaging effects of alcohol, but it stimulates liver regeneration. And considering how many damaging substances there are in our diet and environment today, I think something as simple and as cheap as aspirin could be a lifesaver for a lot of people. And again, I've done a lot of research on it, and the only negative effect I've ever seen is the potential bleeding and damage to the intestinal lining, but that's not from aspirin. That's from the depletion of vitamin K2 that aspirin can cause. So there's 2 very simple things you can do to reap all of the amazing benefits to aspirin and avoid any side effects. 1, just take a small recommended dose. Don't take an insane amount of it. And 2, for every 300 milligrams of aspirin, take at least 2 milligrams of vitamin K2. So that way, again, you're not running into those issues. But as always, don't just take my word for it. You know, these videos are intended not to evaluate for you and tell you exactly how things are. I'm just giving you 16 plus years of research and experimentation. Everything that I recommend here are things that I have tried for at least a year, if not many years, and things that I've researched from like the age of 12. So I'm just giving you my research, my point of view through my experience and understanding, but always, do your own research. So I'd recommend hopping online and going through all the there's hundreds of clinical studies on aspirin, piecing together some things and figuring out for yourself. And then if you are up for it, do a little personal experimentation. But again, what I would recommend if you're going to do that experiment is just make sure you supplement the K2 to avoid any bleeding issues. All right, so quickly answering one and final question. This one reads, vegetarian sources of complete protein, please, in all caps. They really want to know. So from what I have seen, there are few sources of complete vegetarian sources of protein. Vegetarian is easier than vegan. With vegetarians, you can have obviously dairy and eggs. So I would definitely recommend, if you're vegetarian, to get good quality, non-homogenized. If you can get non-pasteurized or vat pasteurized dairy, you want to make sure that you're getting something that was ideally from a Holstein brown cow, because it has the non-inflammatory traditional protein our bodies recognize. So you don't want to get it from the black and white cow because it produces a different type of casein protein known as A2, which can cause issues. So you want the A1 protein, which you can get from the brown cow. And if you can get it from a pasture-raised small local farm where the animals aren't standing in their own feces and being neglected and living a very unhealthy lifestyle overall, that would also be a great idea. And then of course, eggs are a really good quality source of protein, a complete protein. My recommendation on eggs, very much the same applies to eggs that applies to dairy and all animal products. You want to make sure it's raised humanely. And the purpose of this, for me, is both the ethical purposes of just treating another living thing the right way, but also when an animal isn't living life as intended, it protests and it gets sick. So if you take an animal away from its natural habitat, if you take a cow out of the pasture where it's just meant to roam and graze and chill and thousands of acres, it'll probably become sick out of protest to an unnatural environment, and then you're eating a sick animal, and that's probably not going to be very beneficial. So treating the animal right is going to make sure that it treats you right when you go and eat it, and you exchange that cycle of life or complete that cycle of life, however you want to look at it. So definitely with eggs and all animal products, you want to get something that is natural as possible. So find a small local farm where their chickens are just running around in their massive backyard of 100 acres or something, and consume those eggs. Those eggs are also going to be of higher nutritional quality too, because they're out foraging, and chickens will eat mice and they'll eat bugs and they'll eat all sorts of good stuff that makes their eggs very nutritious. When it comes to cooking the eggs, so dairy, you want to make sure it's non-homogenized, vat pasteurized or non-pasteurized even. With eggs, you just want to make sure that you're consuming the whole egg. When you start separating the yolk and the white and consuming only egg whites, you can run into a biotin deficiency, you can run into a tryptophan excess, and you can start to experience issues. So I recommend always consuming the whole egg. The cholesterol myth is a myth. Cholesterol is the building block for all your hormones. You need cholesterol. So consume the whole egg, and my personal recommendation is that you cook the white and leave the yolk runny. If you cook the white, you're going to destroy the enzyme tryptophan hydroxylase, which is what binds to biotin. So cooking the white, so have it like an over easy egg, is going to be the best way to take that egg from my understanding. Now, if you are referring to vegan or plant sources of complete protein, there are really not too many that I'm aware of. Pine pollen contains all the essential amino acids, but of course it's just not going to have an abundance of protein in it necessarily. But pine pollen would be a good protein supplement. And also I'm pretty sure that pea protein is a complete protein in the sense that it contains all of the essential amino acids. But the problem that you're going to see with something like pea protein and any sort of plant protein is that even if it is complete, meaning that it contains all the essential amino acids, a lot of times the plant proteins are still inflammatory for a couple of reasons. They tend to have plant toxins in them. So a lot of legumes and grain bases of proteins also suppress your thyroid because of plant toxic substances in it, like phytates and lectins. Also, a lot of plant sources of protein, even if they have a complete amino acid profile, they tend to be imbalanced, meaning that they don't contain the right ratios, or the ideal ratios, I should say, between certain amino acids. So a lot of plant proteins are lower on the spectrum of glycine and proline, and a lot of non-inflammatory amino acids. And this is the issue with consuming only muscle tissue. If you're only consuming steaks and burger and chicken breast, there's usually little to no glycine or proline and an excess of methionine and tryptophan, which makes those things inflammatory. So when it comes to vegetarian sources of protein, I definitely recommend going dairy, good quality eggs. When it comes to vegan sources of protein, I think it gets very difficult, because even if you find a complete source of protein, you might have these amino acid imbalances that could lead towards inflammation and thyroid issues. So I think one of the safest bets is going to be sticking to pine pollen for like a vegan source, but you're not necessarily going to get tons of protein through the pine pollen. It'd be a good supplement, like an amino acid supplement. So I would probably recommend for vegan sources of protein. Actually, I talk about this a couple of different times on the channel, but fruit, mushrooms, and potatoes are actually all really good sources of protein, surprisingly. They contain something called keto acids, not to be confused with a ketone body. These are different. A ketone acid is like an amino acid that is in its purest form, and you don't necessarily need to metabolize it to utilize it in your cells. So it's a very clean source of protein, although might not be an abundance of it. Think of like mushrooms and potatoes, especially the protein quantity being similar to that of milk. There's not tons of protein in it, but it's really good quality protein. And something else really great about fruit and mushrooms and potatoes and those keto acids is they can deplete phosphorus and ammonia from the body. And an excess of phosphorus and ammonia can age your brain. It can just accelerate the aging process, and it can suppress thyroid function and activate the parathyroid. So I would definitely recommend for anybody, vegan, vegetarian, or meat eater, to definitely get a good amount of fruit, mushrooms, and potatoes in their diet for all of those purposes. All right, guys, that brings this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. If you are interested in winning some free herbs or mushrooms, all you have to do is make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, and just drop a comment or question in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.